Welcome to CFICE's webinar, Students in the Community, Models of Student Community Engagement. My name is Nadine Changfoot, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm a professor at Trent University in political studies, and I've also been involved in community-based research. We have three fantastic presenters with us today. I'd like to introduce you to Bobby Hackett, Eileen O'Connor, and Stephen Hill. Robert, Bobby, is the president of the Corella and Bertram F. Bonner Foundation. Prior to joining the Bonner Foundation, Bobby worked at the Telesis Corporation, an affordable housing developer in Washington, D.C. He also served as managing director of the Campus Outreach Opportunity League, or COOL, an acronym I really like, during its first 3 years of operation. For the past 20 years, Bobby has been associated in various capacities with the Youth Policy Institute, a Washington, D.C.-based nonpartisan organization that researches and reports on policies and programs relating to young people. Bobby received his BA from Harvard University in '85 and a master's in public and private management from Yale University School of Organization and Management in 1990. Our second speaker will be Dr. Eileen O'Connor, who is Associate Professor in the School of Human Kinetics at the University of Ottawa. She completed her graduate studies in history from Université Laval and the University of Ottawa, and undergraduate studies in modern languages and literature from Trent University. She is an engaged scholar in the field of experiential learning and sits on the Academic Advisory Committee of the Centre Michael Jean for Global and Community Engagement at University of Ottawa, as well as the Advisory Board of the Work Integrated Learning Toolkit, supported by the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario. She received the Community Service Learning Professor of the Year Award, a Capital Educators Award, the Faculty of Health Sciences Award for Excellence in Teaching, and the 2016 University of Ottawa Excellence in Education Award. Eileen is very distinguished. This year she was selected also as the 2017 Chair in University Teaching with a focus on building effective practices in experiential and work integrated learning at University of Ottawa. Our third presenter will be Stephen Hill, an Associate Professor in the School of the Environment at Trent University. His research interests include climate policy, low-carbon energy, and community sustainability. In 2016, he was named one of Trent's inaugural Teaching Fellows, and in 2011, he was awarded the Simons Award for Excellence in Teaching, Trent's highest teaching honor. His background spans a range of fields, including a postdoctoral fellowship in the Haskins School of Business at the University of Calgary, and he did his doctoral studies in environmental science from the Faculty of Environmental Design at the University of Calgary, and did an undergraduate degree in chemical engineering as well as biology, both at Queen's University. We're very happy to have Bobby, Eileen, and Stephen here today. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Bobby. Each of our presenters will speak for about 10 minutes. And while I turn it over to Bobby, your screen will temporarily black out and a presentation screen will soon appear. Okay.
Great, thank you. I'm really glad to be here, especially looking forward to hearing the other presenters. I've known for quite a while that a lot of the activity we're involved in here in the States is pretty advanced up in Canada, so I'm really looking forward to learning more. I've got 10 minutes. I've got my little timer on. I'll sprint through this with the idea that you guys will be able to ask questions both during the webinar and afterwards. And I know these slides will be shared, so I'm not so worried that you can read every word of them. Let me just make sure I can click my way through here. Here we go. The Bonner Network started in the fall of 1990. You can see quite a bit of the red ones are in the Appalachian region, which is our original focus. Mrs. Bonner was from that region. Her husband, Bert Bonner, was born in Brooklyn and was a major real estate developer both before the stock market crash, the Great Depression, and then afterwards in the big post-war building boom. And he early on had decided he was going to give away his wealth before he died and started this foundation. They looked around for what they wanted to do and realized, and we have an anti-hunger funding and we have this college funding, which I'll describe, but the focus is really to enable students to go to college who otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity. So this access to education is the first piece. But the second one is structuring that financial aid package so students can have the opportunity to serve while they're in college. Here in the States, we have a federal work study program, and those jobs are typically on campus, not very interesting jobs most of the time. And so our funding has allowed those jobs to be off campus in communities as the students, as I'll describe. Early on, we had these notions around what we call now, eventually called our common commitments. And these are kind of the underlying values and goals of the program from the standpoint not just of the students, but also the educational institution itself, the colleges and universities, are committing themselves to these 6 common commitments: civic engagement, social justice, community building, diversity, international perspective, and spiritual exploration. I'll just make a quick note. The spiritual exploration is there because 85% of the students in the program, when we've surveyed them, will say that their motivation is spiritual or religious. So their compulsion to do this work is, for many of them, is driven by that. So these common commitments were developed in consultation with the schools, both students and staff, and they really truly represent kind of the core of what we've been sort of trying to do over these years. From a programmatic standpoint, because the Bonner program is tied to work study, the typical work study package here at most of the schools is 10 hours a week. And some schools provide additional scholarship funding on top of that. And many of the Bonners find summer internships. The original group of schools, we actually fund 2 of the summer internships, and many students do 3 of them, all 3 summers. And that actually ends up being a very important part of their developmental path. The model, so the model is a cohort model, meaning at each school they're recruiting between 5. Our newest school, Brown University, has recruited 40 students per class. Typically it's sort of 15 to 20. So that means you have between either 20 to 160 Bonners. A lot of schools have maybe 60 to 80 active during the year. For eligibility, we're looking for students who qualify for our federal work study program, although not every student needs to have severe financial need. And one of the reasons for that is frankly, we didn't want the program to be pigeonholed as the program for poor kids. And by having other students in the mix who don't have as much financial need, it sort of allows us to prevent, or the schools to prevent that reputation from happening. We probably didn't have to worry about it in the end because they're so heavily engaged in service that becomes their identity. We look for a 60-40 gender balance, no more than that. We want the school to be, the diversity of the program to be at least as diverse as the school. And these students, because it's a cohort model, become a built-in support group. So the access piece for low-income first-generation students is tough, and this enables them to find a group that they stick with. As I said, they do this 18 hours a week. They grow during that time. They do a lot of cool projects. We've sort of gradually over the years developed this sort of notion of these stages of development. These are the 5 E's. But probably the easier one to look at is we're looking at moving students from doing just direct service, client service if you want to call it that, or coordinating other students, sort of a service leadership role. So over time, begin to do capacity building. A couple of the presenters work on community-based research. That's a very popular form of capacity building projects that the community partners are asking for, that we match up with students in a class, sometimes out of a class. And then for some students, they want to get involved in social action, sort of campaign type work. So there's this progression we're hoping to see happen over the 4 years, from doing individual work to looking at systems and policies. From an hour standpoint, and again, you'll be able to download these charts, so they'll be easier to look at that way. But from an hour standpoint, it's heavy in that first semester, direct service. Very consistently, about 20% of the hours are education and reflection. This is a co-curricular program by and large, so those are typically outside the classroom, although some schools have freshman seminars that they have a Bonner section of, so they're getting credit for those, that work. And then gradually you see that the yellow, they begin to take on some they take on these leadership roles, and then gradually we sort of begin junior year, that in the orange, they begin to develop some capacity building projects with the partners, with the staff, with faculty support. That very ending part, there's something they do their last spring, which is this presentation of learning of their 4 years, a kind of way of summing things up. We're not a cookie cutter program, so every school does this in the way they want. And frankly, this slide here, this is not mandated to look exactly like this, but this is the kind of trend and kind of the goals we have for the students. Here is sort of maybe not typical, but because of maybe this is an ideal way of framing the 4 years in this developmental sequence. Again, this will be a little hard to read on your screens, but you can see we've looked at the knowledge and values that students are sort of developing and confronting and thinking about, the skills, the roles in their positions, which is I just showed you. And then the high impact connections are, how might these things being tied to curricular work the students are doing, tied to internship, study abroad, those kinds of things. And then what are some specific courses people might want to take, or the schools might want to organize, so that there's this pathway. And you can see each of these is sort of tied to one of the academic years, and that's basically the progression we're hoping to see. The impact on students is significant. The 4 years are pretty significant. We've got some good data on that, and we're developing some new instruments on that. It's a good both recruiting tool, but also a good retention tool. Bonners end up integrating with the rest of the students on campus. From the community partners goals, you can sort of just take the flip side of it. They love having Bonners because they get a very steady, essentially a staff person working with them. Sometimes they get a whole team of students, and they enjoy the opportunity to work as co-educators. Again, you take this same chart, you can sort of see the kind of roles students are playing. From a campus-wide goal, we have some of the stuff I've already mentioned. I think you've sort of heard it, but schools are looking for these kind of models for, they want to be more civically engaged. I think students coming into college are demanding that more and more. They want their education to be relevant. They want to be preparing for careers of particularly those who want to make a difference. And so this kind of program helps that. This chart, which is the same one I showed you at the top, but part of the things you have to do from a campus-wise perspective then is put in the programs, develop linkages to the academic curriculum and other structures that are there, and then how might you staff it. This webinar is not, there's not enough time to go into all this detail, but this would give you a little bit of a flavor. If you want, one way to read this chart is to start at the top left corner and work down to the bottom right corner. That's basically the history of our field, at least in the States, over the, say, last 25, 30 years. The challenges in a nutshell, for schools that want to do this, the first challenge has to do with having the money for the stipends, for the staffing. I probably should have put travel here, because travel to and from the service sites is always a challenge for everybody. The second thing in our developmental pathway, students are very comfortable with the service work. and they maybe talk vaguely about social justice and change, but moving them into those capacity building roles, having them work with collaboratives and doing social action kind of stuff, that's a big mindset shift for them. And we still have quite a bit of work to do to pull students up to that. They want to do those things, but they're not necessarily, don't have experience, maybe a little bit. In fact, I don't think the staff or faculty often have enough experience in those areas to offer the students support. And finally, scaling up the capacity building projects. These are kind of, placements versus projects is a pretty big difference. And developing those basically take, particularly beyond the community-based research, but I think it's the area we're most comfortable with in higher ed. Those are tough. People don't have many connections to these collaboratives, so those become another area where there's a lot of work to be done. So that's a quick overview. I think I kept I think maybe it was 11 minutes, but I'll stop there and look forward to hearing questions later on. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bobby. Lots to process and take in there. All right, so I'll invite Eileen to give her presentation, please.
Oui, alors je voulais juste mentionner aussi que je serai capable de répondre à vos questions en français, la suite de présentation, si vous voulez. So today I'm going to talk about work integrated learning, a project that I'm involved with at the University of Ottawa. I'll start with a definition of the term, as well as outline some of the opportunities and the reflection as we're starting to move forward with this project. And certainly the term is not new, and in our review of literature we gained a lot of knowledge from how it's being defined in Australia, for example, in ways in which it's been implemented. In our local context at the University of Ottawa, our work integrated learning conceptualization is structured within the following understanding. By Billett in 2009, work integrated learning is a pedagogical practice whereby students come to learn from the integration of experiences in educational and workplace settings. So the typology that most commonly discussed within the post-secondary sector in Ontario by Sadler in 2011 classifies work-integrated learning into three, at times, overlapping categories. A systematic training in which the workplace is considered the central focus of learning, such as an apprenticeship. A structured work experience, like co-op, an internship, or field research. Institutional partnerships to create initiatives to achieve community goals, for example, service learning. So just to provide really a snapshot of the context in which I'll be speaking about, the University of Ottawa is located in the city of Ottawa, downtown. The population of the National Capital Region is 1.3 million, based on StatsCan 2016. Percentage of the population of the National Capital Region who speak both official languages, English and French, is 44%. And that is reflected in the mandate and mission and composition of our university. It's a large bilingual English-French university, over 41,000 students and 10 faculty. Just over 30% of our students study just in French and 60% in English or in the French immersion stream. And within Ottawa, we have, within the National Capital area, we have 6 post-secondary institutions, 2 bilingual, the University of Ottawa and St. Paul, 2 English, Carleton and Algonquin, 2 French, Université Québec en Outaouais and La Cité, as well as numerous cégeps in Quebec. Here's just a snapshot from the University of Ottawa webpage that outlines some of the programs. You see the university is in close proximity to Parliament buildings, various government and businesses downtown. And within that, we draw on a lot of internal capacity building. So for example, we have faculties of medicine, law, education, engineering, music, management, science, art, social science, and my faculty, health science. And we build on the different practices that we provide for students in their professional programs in terms of clinical placements and practicum. And we look to what's been effective in terms of training and developing reflection tools, as well as providing some tools to create better engagement between the partners and the post-secondary institution. So certainly, when I checked all the lists of the different participants today, we're all very aware of some of the new initiatives from the both Canadian government and for those of us in Ontario at a provincial level, new initiatives to support greater number and greater capacity for work-integrated learning placements on campuses. What we're finding is there's a challenge to integrate students into diverse work and community settings of which they've received little to no preparation, and there's not always the reflection piece that enables them to make the connection to the learning outcomes associated with course curricula. Some of the models of work-integrated learning at the University of Ottawa that we focus on are the structured work experience, for example, co-op, internships, and field research, as well as the institutional partnerships to create initiatives to achieve community goals such as community service learning. So at the University of Ottawa, we have a center, the Michael Jean Center for Global and Community Engagement, that has a staff that works with community partners, nonprofit community partners in the National Capital Region, as well as the professors in their courses to establish placements whereby students from a course can do a 30-hour placement in the community in place of an assignment, and that placement responds to a community-identified need, that it links to the learning objectives of the course, and that the student does reflection on the learning that's occurred, their transferable skills that they've enhanced or acquired, and their potential impact to their growth or to the community partner. This is situated, our community service learning program is situated and structured around Cole's experiential learning theory, particularly with a focus on the reflection for students to articulate the skills that they've enhanced, to continue to build their critical thinking, research skills, and to link what they've experienced within research and debates in the field and current initiatives elsewhere. We also have a co-op program that places over 6,000 students at both the undergraduate and graduate level with 2,000 employers. And so in combination with the over 2,000 placements a year of community service learning, within over 150 courses, there's a lot of structured experiential learning in addition to all the placements in the professional programs as well. So part of this project of really developing an inventory of practices and a community practice of work-integrated learning, we'll build on the literature and good practices that have been developed at other universities. For example, McMaster University's tools that they've created on pathways for collaboration, research and experiential learning collaborations at the University of Alberta, Toronto, UBC, UVic. We'll be also working with communities, industry, and government. We'll be drawing on the tools that we've already established on site at the university for the pre-international placement training, as well as the 300-hour internships, for example, in social science and clinical psychology, or, for example, in my school, 300-hour internships in human kinetics and kinesiology. We're looking at the best practices from the collaborative ventures, for example, in engineering and business, that have an entrepreneurial and community-based component in their various hackathons they hold. Another area where we will gain insight is from the community. And to this, I refer back to the project that Nadine spoke of earlier, the CFICE Community First Impact of Community Engagement, led by Peter Andre Carlson. And we'll be looking at how we can listen and learn from the community. What are their needs? How can we best connect with them? And on this, we're currently in phase 2 of the project. And in particular, I'm working with community partner Jason Garlow from Ottawa Equal Talent Network, who's the community lead as we work to develop some pathways and guides to build an inventory of opportunities for local community-based organizations working in the environmental sector that wish to connect with the post-secondary institutions and to map out the different possibilities of those opportunities. We'll also look to best practices, good practices and guidelines that have been established through Hackett, for example, on their Work Integrated Learning Toolkit, of which I sat on that committee, particularly looking at the samples of assessments that other institutions are using in their practices. And as we really sit and reflect on the kinds of questions that we need to ask as we create these additional opportunities and we try to think about success, inspired by the discussions that were just held last weekend, where I attended last week the Conference Board of Canada Annual Summit on Skills in Education in Toronto. And from these discussions, as well as reading the literature, we know we'll need to focus on 3 areas. The first are the pathways. Even the word pathway is ambiguous. You know, it gives the impression that there's one path, that it's a straight trajectory, that there's a destination that you need to reach at the end of the path. So looking at who frames that, what if students go elsewhere to another destination? When we talk about pathways to and through and from, when we think about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the 94 calls for action, we need to be thoughtful about our actions, who's most often heard, who is most accommodated, who is least heard and accommodated. How will we incorporate Indigenous learning experience and knowing and ensure that that's recognized in their placements with the various community partners. In the pathways, we'll also think about the areas where there's disconnect, for example, between the K-12 jump to a post-secondary institution. Do students know what the disciplines mean? Is there a language gap? And then we'll think about the gap between post-secondary institutions and the workforce and the community. So we'll look at the literature about how to teach people to adopt these guides and pathways that are created, how to enhance guidance counselors, career support. That it's okay if your path zigzags. So we'll focus on, addressing and bridging some of those divides. We'll also look at structuring it not so much as an emphasis on preparing one for jobs that we may not even know what those will be. With the impact of artificial intelligence, for example, we know that many of the jobs that kids in elementary school today, they think about what they'll be doing. These jobs don't yet exist. So we have to look at what we can do with students, and the focus is on transferable skills. So looking at how to build core competencies, how to build cultural competencies, so understanding power relationships and aware of those. Think about how we, conceptualize skills. How can we encourage entrepreneurship and a growth mindset? How can we ensure that students are flexible in their thinking, that they've embraced this, need to be a lifelong learner, that there would probably be a gap between what they've studied and what they will need in their 30 or 40-year career. So how to how to learn to listen and listen to understand. So we'll think about these transferable skills as life skills as well. And the third area to think about is failure. Not usually one it's to talk about, but it is important, particularly in the context of a growing, issue around mental health and concern for the well-being of our students when they're on campus, when they're in the field, when they're in the community. We need to think about the preparation that they'll need to be responsive to their different learning challenges, to think about barriers to inclusion, to recognize that diversity does not mean inclusion. Diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice. So looking about how we can address those barriers, how to encourage resiliency in students, to be self-aware of their capacities and their strengths, and to be confident that they can tackle those as they move forward. So just in closing, I would say that as we move forward, we're going to look at how we can think about the skills within work-integrated learning, teach and encourage students to be self-aware of the skills they have, that they can develop, how we can do that internally as well in the university. So for example, building on opportunities within the business schools, teach the art schools, greater financial skills, that will now enable them to develop some of those life skills that they can eventually apply in a workplace setting as well. So thank you very much. And those are my references to the presentation today. Thank you.
Okay, hi folks. I really want to thank Bobby and Eileen for sharing their stories, and thanks to Nadine for the introduction. It's Steve Hill from Trent. I also want to just say, before I get going too far, that say thanks to Sonia Addison at ULinks and John Maris at the Trent Center for Community Research for their ongoing contributions to this work and my thinking on these topics. And also say thanks to everyone for being here. Looking at the list of participants, it's a very talented group, and so I'm honored and humbled. I've been involved with the CFICE project for the past 5 years, and for the last year and a half, I've been the academic co-lead for one of the CFICE working groups that's developing curricular pathways. It's called the Student Pathways Group. And that's to engage, pathways for students to actually engage in community-driven campus community partnerships and research. So community-based research is often structured to solve a particular problem, provide a partial or full solution for some kind of community problem. And these projects involve community partners who work with students in solving a community-defined or community-driven problem. Ideally, these projects will strengthen the community and university relationship because the university is actually providing a real service to the community in addition to education, but it will also provide these meaningful learning opportunities for students. A key finding from the first phase of the CFICE research project, the first 4 years of the project, was that a lot of students participating in community-based research are ill-prepared for it. And Eileen highlighted this, but I'll just mention it again. There's no real clear prerequisites for students wishing to engage in this type of research, certainly at Trent, beyond having some decent academic performance and decent academic grades. And you see the stark contrast there with the Bonner Foundation model that Bobby presented, where it's a cumulative and a progression from service learning through to the capacity building activities of community-based research. So the consequence of this, in terms of the CFICE project, is that the research and work that students are doing haven't always been useful to community partners, and even in a few cases have really degraded the relationship between university and community partners. Because the students are ill-prepared to do this. They're not serving the needs of the community. So the challenge for the students is, of course, that their skills and the skills they need for community-engaged learning and community-based research are very different from the traditional academic learning that they're very familiar with. So I just want to take a moment to highlight the range and types of community-engaged or work-integrated learning that are possible again, and situate the work that we're doing at Trent as it might relate to both Bobby and Eileen's experience. Trent has a 25-year history of applied research projects with nonprofit community partners and that's our community-based research program. There are some service learning opportunities for students, both within an academic context and also within their co-curricular activities, but they aren't as common as the community-based research projects. The university, with the push from the province, are increasing the number of internship opportunities and professional programs that we have, and we don't really have a history of a cooperative placements, but are certainly starting to explore that cooperative placements with industry. We've also, through the last 5 years of the CFICE project, started to move to place graduate students in community-based research projects and community-based theses. And so that's been an exciting development for us at Trent. Trent's model for creating community-based research opportunities with students uses an independent broker or an independent community-based broker that facilitates the capstone research projects with Trent students. And you can see in this slide that we have two sister organizations, ULINK in Halliburton, that's based in Minden, Ontario, and the Trent Community Research Centre, which is based here in Peterborough. And they serve different communities, the Halliburton community that views Trent very much as its university, and the Peterborough community where we're based. ULINK and the Trent TCRC, as we call them, the Trent Community Research Centre, work in their home communities, but they're independent organizations from Trent. They have their own boards or management committees. And so even though a significant part of their annual budget comes from Trent, they prioritize and serve their communities to focus on community development. And so I was saying that the ULINK and Trent Community Research Centre having the community-based, the community needs as a focus is really important in terms of the relationship, because as an independent broker, they are driving a lot of the activities, a lot of the capacity building or community development activities. At Trent, we develop about 50 student projects each year, and certainly that it's important to our students from a student learning standpoint and from a community development standpoint. In terms of the CFICE Student Pathways activities, number one on the right here, we've been looking at curriculum mapping for community-engaged learning at Trent, and that's to focus on 6 years of post-secondary education. We know that the ability of our students to do research with community partners requires us to think carefully about the skills and competencies that they have, and then to provide those opportunities for doing so. So this kind of curriculum mapping is going to be really important in what we're doing. The second piece here on the right is to build build courses, tools, and modules that support the student learning and skills development in campus community engagement. So in particular, we've been developing a set of online modules to introduce community-based research to undergraduate students who could do this either through a community-based research course or in preparation for a capstone experience. And these modules are going to look at understanding community needs, the roles and responsibilities in partnerships and developing partnership agreements, the nature of collaborative research approaches and participatory research approaches, ethics in community-based research, project management, professional communication and knowledge management, or knowledge mobilization. And so those types of modules that we think will be useful as a stepping stone for students to enter into their upper-year placement. We've also been developing terms of reference for the partnership agreements for graduate theses, which are quite complicated, and looking at how we link with high school programming. I've just highlighted in this next slide some of the community-engaged learning skills and competencies that we've developed, and I won't go through them in great detail, but to mention that there's this idea of personal exploration, the personal development that allows students to self-reflect, and you'll see a lot of these similarities with the learning outcomes that Bobby mentioned in the Bonner, for the Bonner Fellow: professionalism, time management, the diversity awareness and empathy that's needed to understand the other people's experiences and circumstances that are really important in terms of working with nonprofit community partners. That cross-cultural sensitivity that's crucial. Also, things like civic engagement down there at the bottom of the right-hand column that is really about understanding place an understanding community, to have a sense of what the community is about and to be able to characterize it, we think is really important. That you can't just drop a student into any community without them having some experience there. And so that's in particular important in terms of the students who might be working in Haliburton, which is an hour and a half away from the campus. So that's, they need to understand the historical and the contemporary context for people in Haliburton. So I'll stop there, recognizing their time, and say thanks for listening. I also want to say a very special thanks to Nicole for bringing us together and troubleshooting our technical issues as best she can. Thanks, Nicole. And I'll turn things back over to Nadine for the questions and answers.
Okay, thanks, Stephen, for that fantastic presentation. All three presentations have been fabulous for the information Bobby, Eileen, and Stephen have provided regarding the models that they are working with in each their specific geographic locations, as well as the challenges and the benefits that they are experiencing. In terms of one thing I do find in terms of similarities, just quickly to orient us, is that each model orients students from higher education location toward community, community in terms of work experience, service, and then especially within the Bonner model, an emphasis on social justice, and with Trent University, engagement by putting community first to impact community for and guided by the community. And so on that quick recap, one thing that I will float by the webinar audience and the presenters is what I discern is the importance of relationship building between students, faculty, and community, especially moving from those direct service relationships to capacity building and social justice discussions, as well as discussions with community in identifying impact for community by community. So then it would seem that relationship is really important, an important component of all the models. And that is, in my experience, a challenge. Thank you so much, Bobby, Eileen, and Stephen, for sharing your models. Bobby, the Bonner model, Eileen, the WIL, Work Integrated Learning model, and Stephen, the Community Campus Engagement models with the 2CRC and ULinks, and also to the attendees for coming to this webinar. And again, the webinar video will be sent out within the day, within 24 hours. And I also encourage you to please sign up for CFICE's newsletter if you haven't done so already to hear about future CFICE webinars. Thanks, everyone.